Here come the millionaire amateur athletes. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, has just instructed through its Board of Governors that the various leagues and universities that are part of it should begin to develop policies to be in place no later than January 2021, allowing student athletes to profit from the use of their image and likeness and, in effect, reputation. Bill, just at first blush, we've talked about this before because we talked about it in context of a law that California passed. In addition, Pennsylvania and Florida have both been at work on this kind of legislation, and there's a bill introduced in Congress. And frankly, Bill, some people see this as the NCAA trying to get out ahead of the congressional move to prevent that kind of federal legislation. Do you see it as anything different?
I don't know much about the legislative history of it, but the subject is actually very, very interesting to me. Several years ago, I'm a big Florida Gators football fan. That's about the only sport I really follow. And it's been a pretty good year so far. But several years ago, I had a discussion with other Gator fans about this very issue, about the issue of whether or not athletes could be paid for or should be paid for their performances while they're at the university, especially obviously when they're on a scholarship. And my take on it then was you either have to be all in or all out. You either have to be there. Let me rephrase that. There have been so many ways over the course of decades for alumni to essentially pay high quality players without actually paying them. You know, and sometimes they get caught, and sometimes these things become big scandals. But the idea of the amateur athlete is, I think it's probably virtually impossible in this day and age. And paradoxically, I've come to believe that if you allow college athletes to be paid, that will actually increase their graduation rate rather than lower it.
Well, Bill, it seems interesting. You bring up a great point that the boosters, so-called, of these university sports programs have in the past been known to, pass some cash to an athlete, buy him some nice things. Here's a
new car that I'm not driving very often.
Here's a car for your usage. Now, these same boosters could put them in a brand new Lexus as part of an endorsement deal, and there would be nothing at all wrong with it. You seem to be indicating that maybe bringing this all out into the open is not a bad idea.
Well, like I said, you're either all in or all out. And while there is a great deal to admire about the idea of the amateur athlete, I think on some level, those days have passed. And I don't mean they've passed in terms of us being lax about it and all the other things that, they're just come from a lack of rigor or discipline. I think that the entire society has changed so much that those days are over. We'll take a typical example. Let's say you've got a sophomore and he is a breakout, brilliant running back. And he now is faced with the idea in his sophomore season, let's say, he's just knocking it out. And somebody basically says to him, listen, you need to be in the pros. And he knows, here's the calculation he has to weigh. He has to say to himself, all right, I'm a sophomore, I've just finished my sophomore season and got a lot of attention. I can sign with the pros now for $5 million or 10 or whatever, or I can do 2 more years of college and risk having a knee injury or something that takes my entire future away forever. And that's a no-brainer. I don't know anybody who would turn that down. And frankly, I don't know any engineers who would turn that down. If you were an engineering student, second, third year, and somebody came to you and said, hey, I represent SpaceX, you're absolutely brilliant. You can finish college or you can come work for us right now at $5 million a year. Who wouldn't take it? So I think in a strange sort of way, if you allow college athletes a chance to make some money off of their talent, because that's all it's going to be. No one's going to be paying you for good looks, If you allow them to make money off of their talent, I think it removes a great deal of the incentive for so many of these college athletes to drop out after their sophomore year or certainly after their junior year.
But Bill, the NCAA has laid down some principles and guidelines that should direct the way this goes and the way it's put into place. And obviously different leagues, the Big Ten or the SEC will have their ways of interpreting it. The individual schools, Penn State or the University of Florida, will have their particular ways of approaching this, but all within the context of these NCAA guidelines. one of them that they want to do is to make sure that this kind of money coming into this amateur sport doesn't affect recruiting or retention for that matter. It says the NCAA says that they should be done in a way to protect the recruiting environment and prohibit inducements to select, remain at, or transfer to a specific institution. Bill, I have a hard time imagining how that's going to be accomplished because, frankly, some of the bigger schools that have some of the better alumni superstructures and a lot more big corporation CEOs, for example, or private entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and all these kind of people who are among the alumni pool will have a decided advantage in recruiting or in getting a kid to stay or in getting a kid to transfer to another school once he's in college. How do you stop this?
One of the things I learned in debate was that if you're going to analyze a system, if you're going to analyze any kind of a program or something, you have to look at things that are disadvantages, and you have to ask yourself, is this a unique disadvantage? In other words, if we do this change to the rules, will that cause stuff to change? And in the case of, obviously, needless to say, and the University of Florida has one of, if not the largest alumni booster programs in the country. It's phenomenally wealthy. So the question is, how do you play fair to the small schools if the big schools can offer so much more in terms of cash? But again, I don't think that this would be a unique disadvantage. I think it exists already. There's no question in my mind, and again, I hate to keep coming back to football. It's the only sport I follow, college football. But if you have a breakout high school talent, great quarterback, and by the way, coming from Florida, this is an extremely very, very big deal. Florida is a great school to recruit, a great state to recruit from. So let's say you've got a guy he's a quarterback on the state champion team, and let's say that we don't allow people to pay any kind of things. We just try and keep things the way they are. Well, the way they are now, if this guy's that good, he's going to get a number of offers, and almost certainly, I can't think of a reason other than some kind of strange personal thing like a sick relative or something, that high school recruit is almost certainly going to pick the college that is going to give him the most television exposure. And he's going to pick the one that gives him the most television exposure because that's going to end up, the guy wants to play football for a living. That's his best career path. That's his smartest career path. And many young athletes, especially just to take, an example, a young quarterback, let's say, a young quarterback could be recruited by 10 different schools. He could say, I want to go to a big school so I get a lot of playtime and a lot of airtime, rather. But then there's the playtime issue. And he could say to himself, well, I could be the third string quarterback at Alabama, or I could be the first string quarterback at that other school up in Tallahassee. And so they're already doing these calculations, and you can't blame them for this. This is their entire lives. These people, professional athletes, have to come from somewhere. And I think it's actually a good reflection on our society that virtually all professional athletes became professionals because of the career that they had in college, which means that athletes get an education, which is grand. But you can hardly, and anybody who's been to college knows that there's classes like Rocks for Jocks, right? It's Geology 101, and it's just a credit stamp to get the athlete what he needs to get through that year. But educating athletes like that and going to college used to be anyway, nothing but a net gain. But when you get right down to it, Scott, this is the way I look at it and why I'm in favor of these kind of things. When you get right down to it, you're talking about an individual citizen of the United States who has decided upon a career. And he's decided upon a career that utilizes his or her innate talents. And that is the Greek definition of happiness, is using your innate talents to the maximum of their abilities. I have a very, very hard time faulting anybody who wants to be a professional athlete as a career from following their own best advice in terms of how to turn that into a career.
Bill, let's move this upstream a little bit because you brought it up. That high school kid is being recruited by colleges. Well, What if that high school kid's being recruited by a car dealership or a sneaker brand? What if that high school kid is getting a sponsorship deal? What is to prevent, following your libertarian logic of free market, what's to prevent a corporation or at least a local business from coming to the hotshot running back at the local high school and saying, you know what, we would like to get your face on our advertisements, and not only we're going to compensate you and your parents with a little bit of cash, but how'd you like to be driving the hottest new Corvette right now?
Well, when you say that they could be recruited by a corporation, it's not like a guy's going to leave, high school and go and then play for the Adidas Anteaters, Adidas
No, he
doesn't
keeps
have a
playing
team.
at the high school, but the high school, while he's playing at high school, the business makes a sponsorship deal with him to use his image, his likeness.
Yeah. I got it. This absolutely, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that any attempt to pay anybody who's a minor is just plain out. And it's out now. No one's, at least I'm not aware of it. No one is really doing this on the high school level. I'm sure somebody is, and I'm sure it's endemic, but it's nothing like the kind of resources that an alumni association of a university, major university, can push. So any kind of a deal of any kind whatsoever before the person turns 18, I think is just plain.
Are not high school YouTubers getting compensated not only from YouTube ad revenue indirectly from corporations, but no doubt from sponsorships and products that are being sent to them for package openings and things like that?
Yes, and there are some 7 or 8 or 9-year-olds who have YouTube channels far more subscribers than we do, and they get large checks. But that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about, look, a YouTuber can make a decision. And let's say you got a minor, 16-year-old YouTuber, and let's say he's putting out content. He's making a lot of money out of Google ad revenues. Okay, his ability to either do that or not do that is not going to be limited. If he says something that causes him to lose his subscriber base, that doesn't cripple him for the rest of his life. But a professional athlete has this constantly. There's not a day that goes by for them when they don't realize that in the course of my professional day, something that could happen to me while I'm doing my job that could mean that I will never be able to do this job again for the rest of my life. That is a monumental decision. I think that's a decision for an adult to make. A YouTuber can go and do what they want to do without any real consequences downstream, although from what we just saw in terms of people posting nudes and stuff, those days are beginning to change. But basically, I don't think you can compare the two. I think if you're dealing with a person who's 18 years or older, you're dealing with somebody who is legally an adult. And Scott, again, for people who are having a problem with this, I think we have to come back to this idea of unique disadvantage. In other words, is college athletics right now that chariots of fire, 100% pure, amateur athletes with no financial incentives whatsoever, no financial pressures, just playing for the school he wants to get the best education? And the answer is no. And the answer's been no for 70 years now. So since all of this stuff happens anyway, since athletes are given benefits by boosters to recruit them to big universities, and since many students drop out early in order to get to the pros so they can make some money before they have a career-ending injury, since that's already going on, why don't we simply legalize this and get all of this lying and nonsense out of there and let these young men and women decide for themselves what career they want to take.
So, Bill, it's one thing to talk about your Division I, star quarterback for the University of Florida, but the NCAA guidelines also say that these as they lay out these rules for how to conduct these sponsorships, these endorsements, the use of the likeness, the image, and the reputation of their players, that they must enhance principles of diversity, inclusion, and gender equity.
Bill, stop right there.
Think about this. The women's soccer team this year, the world champion U.S. women's soccer team, made a big deal about the inequity of their pay. There are a bunch of Title IX so-called sports programs at colleges that don't draw near the audience of that University of Florida football program.
Right.
But those students will be expected in our modern economy, or at least culture, to be compensated equally. Don't you think they've just really opened a Pandora's box and are just asking for trouble?
Well, now you've completely defeated my entire argument. And you've done it 100% fairly. You've completely defeated my entire argument, because my entire argument was based on the idea of a free market system. And you're right. We don't have a free market system. The reason that the American women's soccer team gets less pay is because fewer people watch them, and fewer people watch them because their soccer games are not as interesting. I hope that's scared away anybody who might have some delusions about
not as
about the
interesting
level of
to as
reality
many
here.
people, perhaps.
Oh, whatever. No, they're just
Apparently
not as good.
intensely
They're not. No, they're
interesting
not
to
as
the
good.
people who
They're
watch
not
it.
as. They're not as good, Scott. That's all there is to it. And the same goes for women's basketball and all the rest of it. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be offended by this, but it doesn't matter whether they're offended by it or not. People vote with their dollars, and that's why male athletes get more money than female
But at
athletes
the
because they're
college level,
faster
Bill,
and
the
stronger.
reason why male athletes get more attention is because the boosters and the universities themselves have poured massive amounts of funding into these college football, primarily college football, and also basketball programs. So that's why the women's volleyball team or the field hockey team or the women's soccer team doesn't get as much attention. They'd have big crowds too if the university paid attention to them.
That's absolutely ridiculous. And everybody knows it. They pretend that that's true, but everybody knows it's not true. And I'm not one of those people who's going to deny reality for the sake of fitting into this ever increasing fantasy world of pretending that things aren't true are true. Not going to do it. I've spoken out repeatedly on how bad allowing transgender males to run in female competitions is a crime against the entire female athlete population of the United States. And what we're seeing, sure enough, is that all across the board now in college athletics, we're seeing men who identify as women coming in first, second, and third, all across the board. And everybody is supposed to go, oh, that's so brave. And everybody's supposed to, nod and go, oh, what a wonderful society we have. Meanwhile, you've just cut 10 million young female athletes completely out of the picture.
But Bill, under these new NCAA guidelines, I know where you're going with this, but it's not really germane to the
Take your
topic.
Title IX thing. Here's your Title IX thing. If you had a female running back who could run a 100-yard dash in 4.6 seconds, that person would be playing for Alabama. Okay? And when that happens, if that happens, I think that's great. If you had a female athlete who was able to, if you had a female athlete who was able to compete with the males and do so in such a way that she becomes a marketable item, fantastic. I am 100% behind that. But when you start talking about quotas and diversity, now all of a sudden, everything I said a few moments ago that makes perfect sense to me no longer works because now government is involved with the market, and now the law is going to be, well, this is what this is worth, but since we don't have enough of this, we're going to take some money from over here, and I'm going to make you put it over there, and the formula will be 40% of the, no, forget it. Forget it. You either have to do this as a free market opportunity for individual citizens to run their own lives or not. And if you want to wriggle all of it up into this Title IX regulation stuff and quotas and diversity and all the rest of it, then the entire conversation we're having is completely moot because the entire issue is going to be decided by some bureaucrat someplace who's going to make a decision about what percentage of male revenues should go to the female revenues and what percentage of revenue should go from a Title I school to a Title III school and so on, Division I, Division III, all that stuff.
If the NCAA and its constituent universities and leagues do not put in these guidelines that a female or a female to male transgender volleyball player must get the same kind of compensation for any use of his or her image or likeness as a male football player, then Congress will certainly pass a law to that effect, don't you think?
Well, it's not true today. LeBron James makes more than the highest paid woman basketball star, whose name I'm afraid I don't know.
But LeBron James's organization isn't owned by the same organization that owns the women's basketball team in most cases. We're talking about Penn State University, for example, will be required either by the NCAA or by Penn State rules, but if not by them, then by Congress to say that female volleyball player or transgender player gets the same image and likeness compensation sponsorship deal as the male football player. How do we not do that in this age?
We not do that by simply saying, no, that's ridiculous, that's insane, and we're not going to do it. That's how we not do it.
Who do you know in Congress who will say that?
Well, maybe it's time for a new Congress, Scott. We deal with philosophical issues here, and it is absolutely true that one of the philosophical issues that we deal with is the reality of the real world, and that's out there. But the system will not work under those circumstances, and everybody knows it. By the way, just so we're clear on this, it doesn't mean to say that there wouldn't be female athletes who wouldn't be able to get tremendous sponsorship deals. I mean, look, Nike sells shoes to women as well, right? So to say that women are going to be excluded, that was not the point I was trying to make. The point I was trying to make is the compensation for the athlete will be determined by their market value. And male athletes have a higher market value than female athletes because they perform at a higher level, period. That's all there is to it. Now, you can mess around with this as much as you want to, and you can add whatever diversity quotas and whatever other, you can throw the whole transgender mix into there and all of it, fine. That's beyond my control. What I'm talking about is a sensible, sane, civilized, fair system where people are rewarded based on what other people think they're worth, not based on what some bureaucrat somewhere has decided they're worth. And if we're not going to free ourselves of this, then the answer to this entire question is, Scott, I don't know. Some idiot somewhere is going to make a law someplace that's going to run upstream from the fundamental laws of economics. And then what will happen is there will be a new system of cheating, like the system we have in place now. There will be a new system. So if you a new black market, essentially. So if you're saying that, okay, so we're going to say that male athletes and female, we're going to allow them to be compensated. Nike can write a check, but if the lead quarterback for Penn State gets $1 million, that means that the head of the women's soccer team has to also get $1 million. If that's the law, then what you're going to find is no one's going to pay that, and Nike will find a way to get $1 million to the guy, and they'll find a way to get $500,000 or $750,000 or maybe $2 million, whatever, to the other person. You cannot cheat the laws of economics. We're talking about people who are dealing with sponsorships, who are selling stuff to people. They're selling Gatorade. They're selling Nike. They're selling stuff, and they're not idiots. They are not required to pay an athlete. And so if a law comes along and says, no, you have to pay this person $9 million because you paid that person $9 million, and I'm a advertised buyer for Nike, and I say, well, that person's not worth $9 million. This guy pulls in this many viewers and she doesn't. Well, you have to pay the $9 million to both of them or nothing. Well, okay, then we'll take the nothing. And we'll figure out some other way to get the guy we want and the girl we want.
Final question, because at the top of the hour, we've got the Statesville College game kickoff happening. So, Bill, it occurs to me that there are a lot of players whose images and likenesses have been used already over the years to promote college athletic programs. We've opened the door now to the idea that there is a value in this, and that value belongs to the student athlete himself. Would you support a movement of reparations for those students who never receive payment for that?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because this is something even the most, and I almost said densest millennial, but I'm really trying to get out of the habit of that. The millennial and Generation Z kids have very little sense of any kind of reality, but it's not their fault. They didn't ask for it. They didn't ask to grow up in a world where everybody comes in first on a baseball team or a soccer game. And by the way, if you think that you're going to have a soccer game where we're not going to keep score because that would hurt the feelings of the team that loses, I'll tell you who is keeping score, and that's the people actually on the field. So I'm glad you brought this up, because this was something that was clear even to people who are self-identify as socialists or communists because they've been taught to believe in this stuff. I asked them, who is the best player in the NBA? And most people would say LeBron James. Okay, let's just, for the sake of the argument, let's agree on that. Who's the worst player in the NBA? What do you mean? Who's the worst player who's wearing a jersey and sits on the bench during NBA season? No one can answer that, but that's not the point. So I'm saying now, is LeBron James worth the same amount of money? Is the best player in the league worth the same amount of money as the worst player in the league? And every single one of these kids says, no, that's insane. They're right.
Well, that doesn't really get to my question, though. My question is, let's say you're a college athlete, Bill. You were that star quarterback at the University of Florida 5 years ago. Yes.
I don't talk about it often because the whole Heisman Trophy thing was just such an embarrassment for me.
But you look great for a 29-year-old, by the way.
Thank you.
And so you played, and your image was used by the university on sportswear and various other kinds of tchotchkes. You were used on TV commercials to promote ticket sales and the like. And you received diddly squat from that. Are you not now entitled to reparations for the use of your image and likeness in a way that was profitable to somebody but not to you?
I would really like to make this issue an entire show. But the entire what reparations in the legal sense means paying somebody to try to make them whole, to recompense them for harm that was done to them. That's what a reparation is. You were harmed by this person, so this person is going to pay you to some way try to make you whole. That's the goal of tort, and that's the idea behind reparations and penalties and all the rest of it. But if you're saying that reparations means going back in time and judging something that happened last year by the rules of this year, you're not talking about reparations now. Now you're talking about something completely different. Now you're talking about simple wishful thinking. Every single member
But you were cheated then, Bill. They just changed the rules to catch up with fairness as it should be.
So how far back do we go, Scott? How far back do we go? You know,
at least this living generation.
Oh, yeah, well, at least this living generation's dying off by the minute. So if we pass the law now and somebody dies before the check is written, do they get the check or not? This is ridiculous. You cannot backwardly date laws or morality. You can try, and you end up with the kind of insane society that we find ourselves drifting to more and more every day. A law is a law, and the law is the law at the date it becomes enacted as law, and not 10 years before that because we think it should have been. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. It's not so hard. So this whole idea of reparations is, look, like I said, the cast of Gilligan's Island and the cast of Star Trek, none of them got residuals ever. The cast of the lamest sitcom that's on TV today does, but these classic shows didn't, because that was the way that the world worked when they signed their contracts. Period. That's the end of it.
Well, I'm afraid the clock has run out on this game, but we are grateful to the members at
You didn't give me a 2-minute warning. Which is another stupid idea.
We have the members at BillWhittle.com have made this possible. In addition, we have a co-promotional partnership with our buddies over at the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, and we're grateful for their help, not only in propping us up in a small financial way, but also in posting our stuff on their website. And we post links to their stuff on ours because we believe in what they're doing, and they believe in what we're doing. You can find a link to the Patriot Post in the description below. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this happen.